Chapter 1. Lydia Brown walked up the stairs from the kitchen to go to her father's bedroom. He had requested that she speak with him right after lunch. He had been sick in bed for the last few weeks and was not showing any improvement. The seriousness of it pressed upon her. He had been slowly wasting away and was starting to complain about pain in his abdomen. Lydia had been praying fervently that her father would get well and be able to work with her again in their tailor shop. Lydia had been working in their shop since she finished school at the age of 16, and she treasured the time spent working with him. She hoped that one of the subjects her father wanted to discuss was giving his permission for her to marry Richard Smith, the son of a local banker in Chicago where they lived. Richard had asked her to marry him when she was 18, and her father had refused to give permission, saying that he wanted her to wait until she was 20 years old. She could not get him to give any other reason than that. Even though she obeyed him, she wished he had given his permission. Many of her school friends had already married and had their first child. She knocked on the door and heard her father's weak voice tell her to enter. She walked into the darkened room. In a split second, she could tell that he was not doing well. His face looked gray, and even though he tried to raise his arm in greeting, he could barely lift his hand. This was not what Lydia wanted to see. She did her best to fight the tears that threatened to come, as she forced a smile on her face as she greeted him. "Hello, Father." She bent down to kiss his cheek. "Hello, Lydia," he weakly replied. "Sit here by my side. I have much to discuss with you." Lydia did as he bid and sat down on a wooden chair that had been placed next to his bed. "I have a story to tell you," her father said slowly, "and while I tell you, I must ask you to listen to what I have to say until I'm done." "I don't want you to tax yourself, Father," Lydia objected as she reached to take his hand. "Maybe you should rest, and we can talk later." "No," he exclaimed as forcefully as he could in his weakened state. "I must tell you now. If I wait, it may be too late." He took a deep breath. "You do realize I am dying, don't you?" Lydia reluctantly nodded, and this time she allowed her tears to fall. "I was hoping the new medicine the doctor gave you would help." "It's too late." Her father shook his head. "I must tell you why your mother and I were able to come to America." Lydia felt confused. "I've heard this story many times, Papa." "You haven't heard the whole story." "Okay, I will listen to what you have to say." "When your mother and I lived in England, I was the valet for the son of a lord." "You know what a valet is, don't you?" "Yes, someone who takes care of the clothes and needs of a privileged person." "Good." Her father continued his story. "This son's name was George Byron. He and I were actually good friends. We grew up together, and although my duties were to take care of his clothes and appearance, he never treated me as a servant. George was educated by tutors, and I was allowed to sit in on the lessons. When he was old enough to attend boarding school, I went with him. Although I couldn't attend his classes, he would teach me things he had learned in the evenings. When he was an adult and had graduated from college, he married. Since he was the youngest son of his family, he wasn't going to inherit any land or property. All of that went to his oldest brother. He did receive inheritance money when he was of age, so he decided he would take that money and his new wife and immigrate to America." Her father paused and tried to reach for a glass of water that sat nearby on a table. Lydia helped him get a drink. He then continued. "George and his wife settled in a town called Maple Grove, Texas. He purchased a cattle ranch with part of his inheritance money and hired a man who lived there to be his foreman, teaching him all about cattle ranching. After George came to America, he wrote to me and offered to pay for your mother's and my expenses to come to America. He wanted us to settle in Texas, but I wanted to open a tailor shop. So he lent me the money to bring us to America and then here to Chicago to start our shop." "That was very nice of him," Lydia commented. "Yes, it was. We would not have been able to come here otherwise. So your mother and I came to America, to Chicago. We opened up the tailor's shop and were able to purchase this home. Then you were born. I insisted on paying him back the money. At first, he wouldn't hear of it. He finally agreed, but he allowed me to pay it back at my leisure. I insisted on a due date for when it all needed to be paid back. We finally agreed." Lydia's father paused as if he had something hard to say, and he did not want to say it. "It's okay," Lydia encouraged him. She was now curious and wanted to know the ending. "Just tell me." He took a deep breath. "We agreed that I would have the money paid back by the time you turned 20 years old." Lydia was confused. What did I have to do with this? Then she had a terrible thought. "Have you been able to pay it back?" Her father continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Once the tailor shop was open and making a profit, I was able to pay a little of the money back every year, but things haven't been going as well as I had hoped with our shop, not since that larger clothing store opened up down the street. Lydia knew what her father was talking about. A few years ago, a large men's clothing establishment opened up a few blocks away from their store. They were offering not only high-quality clothing, but also on-site tailoring services. Since this store opened, customers who used to frequent her father's shop started going there. Apparently, it was easier to purchase clothing and then get it fitted in the same place. Now, the only customers her father's store saw regularly were loyal men who had been coming to his shop since it opened 20 years ago. I had to take out a loan against our shop, Lydia. Her father wheezed and stopped talking again for a drink of water. After a few swallows, he continued. I have not been able to pay George back all of his money, nor pay back the bank. Lydia sat back in her chair in disbelief. She knew there were financial problems, but she had not realized how severe they were. Why didn't you tell me this before now? I could have helped in some way. I didn't want you to worry, and I thought I would be able to pay off the loans. But then I got sick. So what are we going to do? I'm not done with my story yet. Please listen. What I have to say will not be easy for me to tell or for you to hear. Lydia nodded apprehensively, hoping what he had to say would not be too hard to take and that she would be able to figure out a way to get them out of this mess. I made an agreement with my friend, George Byron. We agreed that if I was not able to pay back his loan by the time you were 20 years old, you would marry his son. Lydia gasped at his words and started to protest. He held up a hand to silence her and continued. George has a son who is 4 years older than you. His name is Clinton. Regrettably, George passed away 2 years ago, but even though he's no longer with us, I must honor my promise to him. I am unable to repay the loan to George. I am unable to repay the loan to the bank. When I die, the bank will take over the store in this house. You will not have anywhere to go. You must go to Texas and marry Clinton. Father, I can't do that, Lydia protested. I don't even know the man. How do you know that he will be good to me? You haven't seen Mr. Byron in years. How do you know this will be something that will work out with his son? Lydia nodded apprehensively, hoping what he had to say would not be too hard to take and that she would be able to figure out a way to get them out of this mess. I knew George well. He and I were friends. Though I served him, he never treated me as a servant, but always as an equal. He raised his son with the same kindness, and I'm certain his son will treat you just as well. But he doesn't even know me. Why would he want to marry a woman he has never met? And what about Richard? Lydia reminded her father. Richard wants to marry me. Is this why you would not give me permission to marry Richard? Yes, her father admitted. The loan is due in full on the day you turn 20, which is in a few months. I couldn't agree to a marriage to someone else until I had satisfied this loan with George. I want to marry Richard, father, Lydia argued. I love him. I don't want to be forced to marry a man I have never met. Richard will not be a good husband to you. He will not treat you as you deserve to be treated. You know this deep down inside. His father is the one who will be taking over the shop in this home. There is a reason Richard has been courting you. At her father's words, she remembered a conversation with Richard where he had grabbed her arm in anger because she had refused to leave her father's bedside and go on a walk with him. There had been other instances in the past few months that had concerned her as well, but she had always excused Richard, telling herself he was tired or he had been working too hard. She knew deep down that her father was right to be concerned about Richard. I want you to listen to me very carefully. I must give you some instructions. Her father's voice was weakening. Lydia again took her father's hand and encouraged him to continue. I have purchased a train ticket for you to go to Maple Grove, Texas. I have also set aside some money for you to use for purchasing items you need and for food. I have hidden these items in my desk, in the hidden compartment. I have included instructions on sending a telegram to Mr. Clinton Byron and his address, so you can let him know you are coming. He is aware that you might be visiting him after I am gone. Lydia tried to protest again at his words, but he cut her off. After I am gone, after the funeral, I want you to leave for Maple Grove immediately, the very next day. If the bank finds that ticket and money before you are able to leave, you will find that you have no other choice. I am giving you the opportunity to lead a fulfilling life. I am confident you will have a good life with Clinton. You are to tell no one what your plans are except Noreen. He named the woman who had helped care for Lydia since her mother died 10 years ago and now was nursing her father. She knows of this plan, and she will help you get to the station when it is time. You have always been an obedient daughter. I have been blessed to be your father. I am asking you to honor my wishes this last time. Will you do this? Chapter 2. Lydia stood up and began pacing the room to think. The last thing she wanted to do was travel all the way to Texas and marry a man she had never met, a man her father had never met. This whole story was too incredible to believe. It was as if her father was selling her to settle a debt. She had always trusted her father and the decisions he had made for her since she was a child. He had never steered her down the wrong path. She had a close relationship with her father, especially since her mother had died from consumption. She spent every spare minute she could with him. She loved him deeply and knew that she needed to honor this final request. She needed to trust him one last time. It terrified her to think about traveling so far away to meet and marry a man she did not even know. She should go ahead and secretly accept Richard's marriage proposal instead. At least she knew him. They had grown up together and had attended the same grade school, but she admitted to herself that deep down, she knew the concerns her father had about Richard were true. He did have a terrible temper when things didn't go his way, and sometimes it scared her how angry he would become, but he always apologized after he calmed down. He had never hurt her physically except recently when he had grabbed her arm in anger. If she married him, would that get worse? Lydia stopped her pacing and looked over at her father, who was now asleep. She sat back down on the wooden chair. Over the next few hours, she spent her time devising an alternative solution to their financial problem. She wished there was a way to pay off the loans, but she couldn't think of one. Noreen came into the room to check on her father. She saw Lydia sitting on the chair with tears streaming down her face. She walked over to Lydia, hugged her, and offered her comfort. "Did he finally tell you?" Noreen asked her softly. "If you mean about the loans and about marrying a man I don't even know, then yes, he told me." Noreen sighed with relief. "I have been trying to get him to tell you, ever since Richard first asked you to marry him. I didn't feel it was fair to allow you to think there was a chance you would be able to marry him." "You have known about this for 2 years?" Noreen smiled sadly. "I have known about it a lot longer than that, ever since your mother passed. He has asked me to honor his wishes, to travel to Texas as soon as the funeral is over. I don't know if I can agree to that. Chicago has always been my home. When the bank takes over the shop in this home, you will not have anywhere to go." "But Richard?" Lydia started to say, but stopped when Noreen slowly shook her head, although she did not say anything. Lydia knew Noreen had never liked Richard. "What do you think I should do?" she asked instead. "Your father would not send you into a bad situation," Noreen reminded Lydia. "I think you should go to Texas and marry the man he has chosen for you." "What about you?" Lydia questioned. "What are you going to do?" Then she had an idea. "Can you come with me to Texas?" Noreen shook her head. "I have some savings, and I plan to go and live with my sister Lucy. She's been asking me to come for a while, ever since her husband died. I think we can be a comfort to each other. I haven't wanted to leave you or your father, but now it is time." Lydia felt disappointed with Noreen's decision, but she knew it was for the best. Noreen had always been close to her sister and had wanted to move to be near her. Noreen started to leave the room. "I know you will make the right decision." A little while after Noreen left, Lydia noticed her father had awakened and was watching her. "You look just like my Mary," her father whispered to her, speaking of her mother. "You have grown into a beautiful woman." Lydia gave a bittersweet smile through her tears and leaned over to hug her father. He was so frail. She then knew he would soon join her mother in heaven. "Oh, Papa, I am going to miss you so much," Lydia sobbed as she held her father's hand tightly. "And I will miss you, but I am looking forward to being with your mother again." "I have missed her, too." "I will honor your wishes, Papa." Lydia instantly made her decision. "But I won't leave until—" "No, you don't need to leave right now. Just promise me you will leave as soon as possible. It's for your protection." "I promise," Lydia agreed, forcing a smile through her tears at her father. "Could you read to me out of the latest book from Charles Dickens?" her father requested. Lydia picked up the book he requested from the table near his bed, found the first chapter, and began to read. Chapter 3. 2 weeks later. Lydia looked out of the train window. The conductor had just told her that they would be arriving in Maple Grove in 10 minutes. She had just enough time to pull herself together. She felt nervous at the thought of starting a new chapter of her life. Her father had passed away 2 days after her talk with him. His funeral was scheduled 2 days after his death, and Noreen had taken her to the train station early the next morning. She wondered how long it took Richard to realize that she was gone. Because of her father's warning, Lydia had pretended throughout the days leading to her father's funeral that she was going to marry Richard as soon as it was socially acceptable. She remembered how hard it was to pretend and was glad that she had been able to get away without notice. She felt almost relieved to leave Chicago and the situation with Richard. He had again displayed controlling behavior just before her father's funeral that had scared her, and a part of her was glad circumstances made it so she would not be marrying him. Lydia stared at the passing scenery outside the train window. She wondered what Mr. Clinton Byron would be like. Was he as reluctant as she was to marry? She prayed that her father was correct and that she would have a good life in Texas, but she really didn't know how that was going to happen, since they didn't know each other. Lydia started to gather her belongings. She hadn't taken much with her. There were only a few changes of clothes and some keepsakes that would help her remember her parents and her childhood. Also packed away were her favorite books, although she would have a tough time focusing on any reading. She was dressed in black mourning clothes, and the clothing she brought was also suitable for mourning. She wondered if Mr. Byron would want to marry as soon as she arrived, or if he would allow her to have a period of mourning first. She tried not to think too much about her potential husband and focused on the farms and ranches they were passing. It wasn't very pretty this time of year in July, just dry and hot. She thought Chicago had hot summers, but she was not prepared for the hot, humid weather of Texas. She suddenly felt the train slow down and then come to a stop. The train was scheduled to stop in Maple Grove for a brief period, and most of the travelers began to get off to stretch their legs. Lydia gathered her carpet bag and started to walk toward the exit, to leave the train car. She felt grimy and dirty after her days of riding, and wished she had some way of cleaning up before she met Mr. Byron. As she got off the train, she looked around, trying to guess which man standing on the platform was Mr. Byron. She did not see anyone who she thought he would look like, so she walked towards the train station to stand in the shade of the building and wait for him. As she stood there, she looked around, watching the people around her. Maple Grove looked neat and inviting. It was a small town, but the buildings looked well maintained. She noticed buggies driving away from the train station, leaving dust in their wake as children chased each other with mothers, instructing them to behave. Then Lydia saw a tall, dark, handsome cowboy walking towards her. Clinton Byron sat on the bench in front of the train station to wait for the train to come in with his bride. He had received her telegram a week ago informing him that she would be arriving. He was looking forward to meeting her. He had known his father had arranged this marriage to Lydia early in his life, and surprisingly, he was fine with the arrangement. Now that his father was gone, he spent all of his waking hours running the family cattle ranch. He did not have time to court a woman properly, and he was glad he could skip all that nonsense and still have a wife. He was ready to settle down and start a family. He didn't know why Lydia was coming at this particular time. He knew she was supposed to come when she turned 20 years old, but that would not be for months. He was just grateful she was coming. Clinton started to think about the wedding. Would she want to get married right away? That would be the logical solution. It would not be proper to have her in his home for too long, even though his mother still resided there. The ranch house was large, and his mother had her own suite of rooms, which she shared with his 15-year-old sister, Jamie. A separate set of rooms was added onto the ranch house just for his use. It would not look good for Lydia to be living there and not be married to him. Clinton's thoughts turned to the ranch and the daily responsibilities he needed to accomplish. Even though he had a competent foreman and many hands working for him, he still liked to be in the middle of things. He wanted to ensure that the fencing on the north side of the horse pasture was inspected and the hole he had noticed was repaired. He was also considering the idea of building a separate barn to house the horses, rather than keeping them in the same barn as the cattle. A train horn interrupted his thoughts, and he watched as the train pulled into the station. Many people started to get off the train, likely to get something to eat at the boarding house that was located across the street, or to walk around a bit before getting back on to continue their journey. He waited patiently, watching for a young woman who would be alone. He soon saw a pretty young woman get off the train by herself carrying a carpet bag. He immediately noticed her almost black hair that had escaped the bun she had on the back of her head. She wasn't tall, a foot shorter than his height of a little over 6 feet. He also noticed that she was dressed in mourning attire. He started to dismiss her as the woman he was waiting for, but he watched as she turned around as if looking for someone, then walked into the shade the train station provided and continued to watch as if she was waiting for someone. A train worker set a small trunk beside her. He figured he had better see who she was, although he was not expecting someone who would be wearing a black dress. As he approached the young woman, she turned to watch him come closer. He removed his cowboy hat and asked, "I am wondering if you are Miss Lydia Brown?" The pretty young woman nodded. Yes, I am. You must be Mr. Clinton Byron. I am glad you received my telegram. For a moment they both stood looking at each other, neither of them knowing what to say. I hope you had a good trip, Clinton finally said, breaking the silence. It was fine, although a bit long, Lydia replied. I am glad I'm finally here. Clinton really wanted to know why she was dressed in black, but decided they could talk on the ride back to his ranch. My wagon is over there. He pointed to a wagon with a team of brown horses. Let's get your things loaded and we can be on our way. Lydia nodded but hesitated to follow him. I was wondering if there is a place where I could freshen up a bit. Clinton bowed slightly. I can take you to the boarding house. I am sure the sisters would be willing to help you with that. Is this your only luggage? He gestured to the small carpet bag next to her. Lydia acknowledged, watching him as he hoisted it up on his shoulder, and the two of them walked over to place her belongings in the back of his wagon. I didn't pack much. I just brought what I would need for the immediate future, she explained. Clinton felt confused at her words and almost started to ask questions, but he reminded himself they would have plenty of time to talk later. Let me take you to the boarding house. She took his arm, and he led her across the street to a large 2-story Victorian house. Two sisters, Mrs. Sarah and Sally Collier, ran the boarding house and a small restaurant located inside. They both were in their 50s and had never married. They had been around running their business for as long as Clinton could remember. He led Lydia into the parlor of the large home and saw one of the sisters, Miss Sally Collier, at a desk writing down a customer's information. They waited until she was finished. Then she turned to them. Hello, Mr. Byron, she greeted him. What can I do for you? This is Miss Lydia Brown. She has just arrived from Chicago by train and will be staying with us at the ranch. She would like to freshen up before we head out there. Clinton introduced her to the older woman. Lydia, this is Miss Sally Collier, one of the fine women who run this establishment. We call her Miss Sally in order not to confuse her with her sister, Miss Sarah. Miss Sally grasped Lydia's hand. Welcome to Maple Grove. Just follow me, dear. I will get you some water and a towel. You'll feel better in no time. Miss Sally started to lead her away from Clinton towards the back of the house. Thank you, Lydia said to her. Clinton noticed that she looked very tired. Follow me, dear. I will get you some water and a towel. You'll feel better in no time. Miss Sally started to lead her away from Clinton towards the back of the house. Lydia turned to smile at Clinton and then followed Miss Sally out of the room, clutching her bag. Clinton felt that he couldn't sit on the fancy sofas in the room with his dusty clothes, so he wandered around the parlor, looking at the pictures and knickknacks, until Lydia returned. He watched her thank Miss Sally again and then turned to Clinton. She had brushed her hair, braided it, and put it back in the bun. Her face looked pink, as if recently scrubbed. She didn't look as pale as she had when he first saw her. He noticed that she was holding a small basket in addition to her bag. Miss Sally gave us some food to eat on our way, Lydia explained, as she held up the basket. That's nice of her, Clinton said, thinking about the packed food in another basket his housekeeper had fixed for that very purpose in his wagon. They surely wouldn't go hungry. He reached over and took her bag. We can go now, Lydia said to him and took his arm again as they left the boarding house, carrying the basket on the other arm. Clinton felt tongue-tied. She looked even prettier than before. Was it possible he could have feelings for her this early in their relationship? They walked silently back to where he had left his wagon and horses, and he helped her into the seat. He set the basket Miss Sally had given her next to the other basket of food, and then he jumped up beside her and lightly slapped the reins on the horses' backs to get them moving. Chapter 4. Lydia sat next to Clinton as they headed out of town toward his ranch. How far away is your ranch? She asked after a long silence. She tried not to stare at him, but she had never seen anyone as handsome as he was. He had such broad shoulders, and she could see his muscles ripple under his plaid shirt as he controlled the horses. His dark brown hair was long enough that the tips touched the top of his collar, and it curled a bit at the ends. He had on a black cowboy hat that made him look even more handsome. It's about an hour or so from town, Clinton answered. He was staring straight ahead as if driving the horses needed all his attention. There was another long silence. Why are you wearing morning clothes? He finally asked. Lydia sighed in relief. He was finally talking. My father died a fortnight ago. Oh, I'm sorry, Clinton cursed under his breath. Is that why you came here so quickly? There were a lot of things that happened. I can't talk about it right now. I will say that my father instructed me to come immediately after his funeral, which I did." Her voice was shaky as she talked. The last thing she wanted to do was talk about her father's death and what he had told her before he died. Clinton reached over, took her hand and squeezed it. "I'm glad you're here. I have been waiting a long time for you to come." "You have?" Lydia was surprised at his words. "How long have you known about me and about our father's arrangement?" "I think I was about 12 years old when my father told me." "And it doesn't bother you that this arrangement has been made and that you can't choose your own bride?" Lydia questioned. Clinton shook his head. "Nah, I was fine with it. My father was a wise man, and I've always trusted him. Besides, I spend so much time running the ranch, I don't have time to look for a wife." Lydia was silent for a moment. "I found out a few days before my father's death." Clinton could not believe what he was hearing. "You mean you didn't know about me at all?" "I knew about your family, and I knew your father helped my parents come to America, but I didn't know all the details." "How do you feel about it?" "I don't seem to have a choice, do I?" "You always have a choice, Lydia. I am not going to force you to marry me." "What are my other options?" "The only thing I know how to do is work in a clothing shop. I doubt there will be a need for that type of work in Maple Grove." "Probably not," Clinton agreed, "but we can work something out. Your father lent my father some money to come to America and to set up our store, and he was not able to pay it back before he died. He told me I needed to honor his agreement. I have no other way to pay it back. In fact, I don't even know the amount left that he owed." Clinton frowned, not liking what he was hearing. Why would her father insist on this marriage? Clinton was aware of the circumstances behind the agreement, and he knew her father had been able to repay almost all of the money. He knew his own father would have insisted on forgiving the rest if he had been alive. His family had a substantial amount of money, and the cattle ranch was thriving. He did not have a problem with the arranged marriage. He already liked what he saw of her. She was one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen, with hair so dark that it was almost black. The color contrasted with her rosy face. She was very mild-mannered. He could tell she had loved her father, so much so that she was honoring her father's arrangement and his wishes. He wondered if there was another reason her father was insisting she marry him. Lydia changed the subject and started asking questions about his ranch and his family. He was grateful to talk about something else and answered her questions. He also asked her questions about her life in Chicago, but he knew this situation would need to be addressed before a marriage could take place. Hopefully, his mother would know the best thing to do. He tried not to feel disappointed that she might choose not to marry him. Halfway through the drive, Clinton suggested they eat the food Miss Sally and his housekeeper had prepared, and Lydia agreed. She opened the baskets and found meat sandwiches, apples, and cookies. She divided the food up between them, and they ate in silence as Clinton continued to drive the wagon towards home. Lydia was pleasantly surprised when they arrived at Clinton's ranch. They had turned from the main road onto a long dirt lane lined with large oak trees on either side, about a quarter of a mile long. Then she saw the ranch house. It was the most beautiful home she had ever seen. It was a one-level ranch house, spread out in a U-shaped design. It was painted white with gray and blue trim, and the same type of oak trees that lined the lane surrounded the home. Lydia noticed a large vegetable garden off to one side. She could tell just by looking that Clinton's family was very well off. The home and all the surrounding buildings were well maintained. The wagon stopped in front of the house, and Clinton jumped down and turned to help Lydia. The screen door then opened, and a teenage girl ran out to meet them, letting the door bang close behind her. "You are finally here," the girl exclaimed. "I have been so excited to meet you." Lydia smiled at her and looked to Clinton for an introduction. "This is my little sister, Jamie," Clinton said. "She's excited that another woman will be in the household besides our mother and housekeeper." "I'm happy to be here," Lydia said, although she wasn't sure she meant it. There had been many changes in her life over the last month. She really needed time to regroup and think things through. Jamie linked her arm through Lydia's and led her to the house. "Come inside. Our housekeeper has made refreshments. I am sure you are parched. It's been so hot." Lydia allowed Jamie to lead her into the house. It was surprisingly cool inside. Clinton was right behind them. He carried Lydia's carpet bag and set it down in the entryway. "Let's go to the kitchen. I can show you to your room later." Clinton turned to his sister. "Where is Mother?" "She is in the kitchen with Mrs. Young." She wanted to make sure the lemonade was fresh. Lydia followed Clinton and Jamie down a hallway into a large dining area. Two women were in the room busily arranging the refreshments. The older woman looked up and smiled with delight. "Hello." The woman walked up to Lydia and reached for her hand. "I am Isabel Byron, Clinton's mother." "Welcome to our home." Lydia smiled and started to feel a comfort she had not felt in a long time. It looked like she was wanted here. "Thank you for the kind welcome." "You have a lovely home. I have never seen anything like it, Mrs. Byron." "It keeps us busy, but we are happy here." Mrs. Byron led Lydia to the table. "We have prepared some tea. Would you like to sit down, or should we show you to your room so you can freshen up first?" "Actually, what you have here looks delicious," Lydia replied and sat down. Clinton sat next to her and Jamie, and Mrs. Byron sat across from them. The housekeeper, Mrs. Young, walked around the table and offered tea or lemonade, and Lydia chose the lemonade since it had been a long time since she had had any. She waited until everyone was served, then took a sip of her drink. It tasted refreshing with just the right amount of sugar. She loaded her plate with small sandwiches and desserts, even though she had enjoyed the food a while ago on the way to the ranch. Because of everything she had been dealing with, her father's death and the long trip to Texas, she had not eaten very much, and she suddenly was very hungry. Mrs. Byron started to ask her questions about her train trip. Since Lydia was wearing a mourning dress, she rightly assumed it was her father who had died, and she asked about the circumstances surrounding his illness and death. Soon, Lydia began to feel more at ease in her new surroundings and with the new people who would soon become a significant part of her life. When Lydia had eaten her fill, Clinton asked her for permission to share with his mother and sister what she had told them on the way to the ranch. Lydia nodded, and Clinton proceeded to let them know how Lydia had only recently found out about the arranged marriage to Clinton a few days before her father's death. He explained that the circumstances were such that he did not want to hold Lydia to the marriage arrangement. "I am so sorry you have had to go through this," Mrs. Byron said with sympathy. "I agree with Clinton. If my husband were still alive, he would not have insisted on this marriage just because of money. I do want to explain something to you that might help you understand why this arrangement was made, if I may." Lydia nodded her agreement, and Mrs. Byron continued. "This arrangement was not made because of money, as you might assume from what your father said. Your father and my husband were close friends in England before we immigrated to America. Even though they came from different economic backgrounds, they had grown up together. When my husband and I decided to come to America, we wanted your father to come with us, but he was courting your mother and wanted to wait until after their marriage. Your parents followed us a few years later." Lydia interjected. "Father told me your husband loaned him some money to come to America and start his tailoring business." "He did, but he never thought of it as a loan." "When your father served as a valet to my husband, he was not paid the amount he was entitled to. His oldest brother was the keeper of the estate and refused to pay for your father's services, so my husband paid for what he could with his own money. But at the time, he was not of age and so had not received his inheritance. He was given an allowance, but it wasn't much, and so he couldn't pay your father very much. Because of the friendship between them, your father continued to serve as a valet with little pay." Lydia thought that sounded like her father. He had always been willing to help another. It was common for her to see him not charge as much as he could have for a tailoring job. He would also hire a man to work in their shop, even though they really didn't need the help, nor could they afford to pay him a fair wage. Rather, he was hired just because he needed a job. Sometimes he would also send Lydia to the neighborhood grocery store to purchase food and then instruct her to take it to a family in need. George felt that by sponsoring your parents and paying for them to come to America, it would be a fair way to pay back the wages your father should have earned. But your father refused, requesting that it be a loan, including the money to help start his shop. We actually wanted them to settle here in Texas, but your father had his heart set on owning his own business and settling in a larger city, and so he chose Chicago." Clinton spoke up. "I do know personally that your father was able to repay most of that loan. I do not think it would be just or fair to hold you to the little that is owed, especially since father had not wanted it to be a loan in the first place." "My father was a very proud man," Lydia responded. "It would be just like him to insist on repaying the money, but I don't understand where the arranged marriage comes in." "It started out as a joke, really." Mrs. Byron continued the story. "In one letter, George suggested that, if your father would agree to a marriage between you and Clinton, the loan would be forgiven. At the time, Clinton was 6 years old. Your father took the suggestion to heart, and eventually, the agreement was that the marriage would happen when you were 20 years old." As Lydia listened to this side of the story, she admitted to herself that, again, this sounded just like what her father would have done. He was very willing to help others, but he was very stubborn about accepting help. I am curious why he couldn't have just paid it off. He really didn't owe very much. It was just a few dollars, Clinton said. Really? Lydia was shocked. Why hadn't her father just paid it off? It did not make sense to her. Clinton leaned toward her. I was serious when I said marrying me is your choice. I will not insist you honor our father's agreement. Mrs. Byron looked at her son. She was so proud of him. This is a wise decision, my son. Lydia started to feel very tired. The events of the last few weeks, along with the traveling, seemed to be catching up with her. I will need to think about it. Mrs. Byron noticed her fatigue. Come, let me show you to the room we have set up for you. Mrs. Byron stood up and indicated that Lydia do the same. Clinton, could you bring her things? I'm so tired all of a sudden. Lydia stood up to follow her. She was feeling so fatigued that she didn't even think about thanking them for the food, but she followed Mrs. Byron down the hallway and into a beautiful bedroom. Too tired to look around, she focused on the comfortable bed that was set up against a wall. As soon as her things were brought in and she was alone, she removed her black dress and sank into the bed, instantly falling asleep. Clinton returned to the dining area after he dropped off Lydia's things. Jamie had disappeared, and he sat down to wait, as he knew his mother would appear soon. He was surprised to feel a distinct disappointment at the turn of events. He wondered what decision Lydia would make and knew that, if he were in Lydia's position, he would make a different decision other than marriage. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes in thought. He soon heard footsteps behind him and silently waited until his mother sat beside him. She was very tired. I would expect she would sleep until late morning, his mother commented. I doubt she got any real rest on the train. I know I don't rest well when I travel. Clinton felt his mother's hand cover his own. These are hard circumstances Lydia has been through the last few months. I had no idea that what started out as a joke between your father and hers would turn into something so serious. It makes me question why, Clinton agreed. I wonder if there was something going on that her father was trying to protect her from. I have been thinking the same, her mother said. We may never know, but I do think that telling her that marriage to you will be her choice is wise. You do not want to start a marriage with force. There could be resentment involved. His mother paused, making Clinton look at her. Do you still want to marry her, knowing what you know? This decision is affecting you, too. If she wants to, then I am still willing, Clinton confirmed. Well, that's good. His mother nodded in approval. They sat in silence for a few minutes. We do have something we should discuss, though. I put her in the room we had planned for her in your wing. If she decides not to marry or does not want to marry right away, we will need to make alternative arrangements for her accommodation. It will not be proper for her to be in your wing. Could she stay in one of your rooms? I'm not sure. Remember, I am remodeling part of my wing, and Jamie is using the small room just across from mine until the remodeling is completed. Let's just keep quiet about her being here for now. Let her rest from her travels. We can talk about this again in a few days, Clinton suggested, and his mother agreed. Chapter 5. It took 2 days before Lydia started to feel more like herself. She slept most of the time, only getting up for meals. Then she woke up on the third morning and was alert enough to think about the changes in her life. She wished she knew why her father had been so insistent that she come to Texas to marry Clinton when he could have paid off the debt. In fact, if she had turned in her train ticket, she could have paid it off using that money. Then she remembered that the bank would have taken over the house and the tailor store, and unless she agreed to marry Richard, she would not have had anywhere to go. Her father had made it seem like she had no choice. After hearing the entire story, she was grateful that Clinton was willing to allow her to choose. But what should she do? If she decided not to marry Clinton, she would need to find a way to support herself financially. She would need to find a place to live. She did not think she would be able to find that in Maple Grove since it was such a small town. She could travel to a nearby town or city. Clinton did offer to help her if she needed it. Her other option was to marry Clinton. Would that really be such a bad option? When she thought about marrying Clinton, she found herself blushing. Being married to him would not be a hardship. Never again would she have the worry over money that had shadowed her entire life. Her father's shop had provided a modest living, though luxuries had always been out of reach, particularly in recent years. Still, she was determined that her decision would not be guided by money. The little she saw of the ranch she liked. The ranch was well cared for. They had made the land surrounding the home beautiful with shade trees and strategically placed flower beds. Finally, after considering all angles, Lydia decided to go ahead with the marriage, if Clinton was still willing. Lydia got up and looked around for her bag, so she could put on her one clean black dress, but it was nowhere to be found. After searching the room, she found all her clothes neatly hanging in the closet. They had been cleaned and pressed. Grateful, she reached for her favorite outfit and slipped it on, then brushed her black hair while deciding to leave it hanging down her back. With a quick wash of her face, she was then ready to confront the family. Lydia walked into the dining room and saw that a buffet had been set up on the side of the room. Mrs. Byron and Jamie were at the table eating. Jamie saw her come in. "You're finally awake," Jamie exclaimed happily. "Make yourself a plate and come sit down." Mrs. Byron smiled. "Are you feeling better, dear?" "I am, thank you." Lydia picked up a plate and helped herself to the most delicious food she had seen in a long time. There were various fruits, along with the usual breakfast dishes of eggs and meats. She took her plate to the table and sat down next to Jamie. "This looks delicious," Lydia commented. She bowed her head and silently said a prayer, then started to eat. Mrs. Byron and Jamie began discussing the day and the tasks that needed to be completed. Mrs. Byron had a pad of paper next to her and was writing down the items in a list as they talked. Lydia wondered where Clinton was and decided he was out working on the ranch somewhere. They included Lydia in the conversation when they could. When Lydia had finished her breakfast, she silently wondered what she should do next. Was there something she could help with around the house or yard? "I can help with something if you would like," she finally offered. "I am a fairly good cook, and I can clean." Jamie looked surprised at her words. "We have a cook and a few maids. You don't need to do those things." Mrs. Byron smiled. "Thank you for your offer, though. We would like you to rest as much as you need to. Most of what Jamie and I do around here involves gardening and produce. Jamie also likes to help with the horses." "You have horses?" Lydia asked with growing excitement. She loved horses, but they had not been able to afford to own one in Chicago. They got around on foot when they needed to go anywhere. "We have many horses," Jamie said. "Some are used for working around the ranch, but the others we ride just for fun. I can show you the barn if you would like. We could go for a ride." "I actually don't know how to ride," Lydia admitted. "There really wasn't a need for it in Chicago where I lived." "Clinton can teach you," Jamie decided, looking delighted at being able to get the two together. "I really hope you decide to marry my brother. He would be a good husband, and I would love to have a sister." She stopped talking when her mother touched her arm. "This is a discussion she needs to have with Clinton, not you," her mother told her daughter. "You are not to talk to her about it again." Lydia smiled at Jamie. "It's okay." She was glad to know she was wanted. Mrs. Byron smiled at Lydia. "Why don't you go with Jamie to the barn? She can show you around." Lydia agreed and then stood up to follow Jamie. They walked out of the house, Jamie talking the whole time. She talked about her love of the ranch and showed her more of the large vegetable garden as they walked by. Lydia noticed that a fence had been built around it, and Jamie stopped talking long enough to walk through a gate and pull some carrots. When they got to the barn, Jamie led her inside and immediately took her to her favorite horse. "This is Honey. I have had her since she was a filly. She and I are great friends." Lydia watched as Jamie gave one of the carrots to the horse. She could tell it got its name from its dark, golden, honey-colored coat. She was a beautiful horse and obviously well cared for. Lydia tentatively reached out to touch the horse. Honey still crunching on the carrot. As the two looked at each other, Lydia heard footsteps and turned around to see who it was. She saw Clinton coming toward them. Her heart jumped as she saw him. He really was ruggedly handsome in his blue pants, red plaid shirt, and black cowboy hat. She watched as a smile spread across his face when he saw her standing next to Jamie. "I'm glad to see you are up," he said when he reached them. He reached over and patted Honey on the side of her neck. "I hope you are rested." "I'm feeling much better, thank you." Lydia suddenly felt shy around him, knowing that this man would soon be her husband if he still agreed to it. Jamie and Clinton exchanged small talk while Lydia stood silently by. She faintly heard Jamie make an excuse to leave and left the barn quickly, leaving her alone with Clinton. Clinton stood there studying her intently, and the look on his face made her blush again. She did that when he looked at her. "Jamie's horse is beautiful," she commented, trying to divert his gaze away from her. "I always wanted to learn to ride, but it wasn't feasible in the city where we lived." "I can arrange for someone to teach you if you would like," Clinton offered. "Actually, I would like to talk with you when you have some time." "How about right now?" Clinton asked. "It's as good a time as any." "We can talk in my office over there." He gestured to a small room that was located at the end of the barn. Lydia nodded her agreement. He reached out as if he wanted to take her hand, but he then backed away and led her to the little room, making sure he kept the door open. In the room, there was a desk with a chair behind it. A set of shelves with assorted items on them were on the wall next to the desk. There were chairs sitting in front of the desk as well, and he indicated to her with his hand that she should sit in one of them while he sat in another. "Now, what did you want to talk about?" Clinton asked. "Do you have everything you need? If there is something you can think of, just let my mother know, and she will make sure you get it." "No, I am fine." "I don't need anything," Lydia responded. "I was just wondering if I can talk to you about the marriage our fathers arranged." Clinton looked a little apprehensive. "I was serious when I said I would not force you to marry me." "I know, and I appreciate that." Lydia looked down at her clasped hands in her lap. "But—" "Yes?" Clinton asked when Lydia didn't finish her sentence. "I would like to go ahead with the marriage, that is, if you still want to," Lydia said with a rush. "After all, the decision our fathers arranged affects you as well." Clinton's eyes lit up. "I haven't changed my mind. I would be fine going along with it." Lydia felt relief as she heard his words. "There isn't someone you would rather marry, someone you know?" she questioned, wanting to make sure. "No, there isn't." "But I could ask you the same question," Clinton responded. "There isn't someone back in Chicago who you would have wanted to marry if your father hadn't died?" Lydia thought briefly of Richard and the mess she had left behind. "No, there isn't." Clinton reached out and linked his hand with hers. "Then I will make it official. Lydia, will you marry me and be my wife and the mother of my children?" Lydia nodded. "Yes, I will." It impressed her that he officially asked her. "I just don't know when would be best. In the city, since I am in mourning, it wouldn't be proper for me to marry for a year." "Do you want to wait for a year?" asked Clinton. Lydia hesitated, then shook her head, and Clinton looked relieved. "I am sorry that you have just lost your father." "I know how you feel. My father died 2 years ago. I was lucky that I had my family around me. Things are different here than they are in the cities. I think it will be okay if we marry quickly but quietly, maybe a week from Saturday. We can marry here on the ranch. It would please Mother if we were to marry near her gardens, which she works so hard on. We would only invite close family and some of the ranch hands because of your father's death. Is that agreeable to you?" "I am inclined to say yes," she replied, though inwardly she prayed it was the right choice. A quiet peace settled over her whenever she pictured life as Clinton's wife, and she reminded herself she was placing her trust in her father's guidance one final time. Clinton pulled Lydia to her feet and touched her chin with his hand. He looked at her very intently, then slowly bent and pressed his lips to her own. The kiss was very brief, but Lydia felt its impact clear down to her toes. Clinton broke away and stood back as if he needed to keep from kissing her again. He took her hand. "Let's go. Let Mother and Jamie know of our decision." They left the barn, walking toward a new future together. Chapter 6. Almost 5 years later. It was still dark outside when Lydia woke, though dawn was not far off. Lying quietly so Clinton could rest, she listened to his even breathing and kept still. He needed his sleep, and if he realized she was awake, he would only fuss over her again. Her thoughts drifted back over the years since arriving in Texas. Loss after loss weighed on her heart. Her father's death. Letters to Noreen returned unopened with no explanation. The loss of her family's home and business in Chicago. Worst of all were the 4 miscarriages. The last had nearly cost her life, leaving her body too damaged for another attempt. The doctor had warned against trying again, and though his words were practical, they felt like a final door slamming shut. Since then, a shadow had settled over her spirit. Silence had become her companion, and she often preferred the company of her horse, Comanche, to that of people. Clinton had taught her to ride soon after their marriage, and the open hills had become her sanctuary. Comanche was a gift from him, and the bond with the animal was the closest thing to joy she knew. The doctor had only just permitted her to ride again after weeks of restriction due to blood loss. Now, the thought of freedom in the saddle filled her with anticipation. Clinton was a good husband, always steady, hard-working, and kind. His long days on the ranch, though, left her feeling alone more often than not. Sometimes she wished he would stay home more, but duty always called him away before sunrise and kept him until dark. There was comfort in the relationship with his family. Jamie, Clinton's sister, had recently married and moved west with her minister husband. Lydia missed her deeply but cherished the letters they exchanged. Clinton's mother, Isabel, had grown frail since her stroke and now needed constant care. Clinton had hired a nurse to live in the ranch house to assist. Still, happiness remained elusive. The grief of childlessness lingered, leaving her withdrawn. Even Clinton, who once reached for her tenderly, had become distant, their marriage settling into friendship rather than intimacy. She often wondered if he regretted choosing her, a wife unable to give him children. The bed shifted as Clinton rose and dressed quietly. After he left, Lydia lay a few minutes longer, restless before rising. The sun was breaking over the horizon, and she longed for a ride before the heat set in. Pulling on her split riding skirt and worn boots, she braided her black hair, then headed to the kitchen. Mrs. Young, the housekeeper, already had breakfast underway. A plate of toast and a steaming cup of coffee waited. "Good morning, Mrs. Byron," Mrs. Young greeted her. "Mr. Byron has already left for the barn." "Good morning," Lydia returned the greeting, ignoring the comment about her husband. "Thank you for the coffee and toast." As she ate, Mrs. Young chattered about the weather, the garden, and neighbors. Lydia listened politely, though her thoughts were far away. When she heard that Emily, the foreman's wife, was expecting again, envy rose in her throat. She pushed back from the table. "Thanks for breakfast." "I'll be gone a few hours. I'm riding Comanche." Mrs. Young fussed over her, wrapping bacon and eggs in a cloth for the road. Lydia accepted the bundle with a small smile and left the house. At the barn, Comanche greeted her with a low nicker. She stroked his sleek black coat and white-marked forehead, whispering, "Ready for a run, boy?" Saddling him quickly, she gathered her supplies, water, a gun Clinton had insisted she carry, and the food bundle. Just as she placed her foot in the stirrup, a hand touched her shoulder. "Lydia?" Clinton's voice was gentle. He brushed a kiss across her cheek. "I should have known you'd be up early to ride." "The doctor said it was all right now and I couldn't wait any longer," she said. He studied her face, then let his hand drop. "Do you have everything you need?" She nodded. With his help, she mounted Comanche. The familiar tingling at his touch lingered even after he stepped back. "I'll be back by lunchtime," she promised. Then, with a nudge of her heels, the horse carried her away. Wind rushed through her hair as the ranch fell behind. She slowed Comanche once the hills came into view, savoring the beauty around her, hawks circling overhead, songbirds trilling in the trees, the shimmer of the river winding through green grass and rocky outcroppings. Her favorite place lay at a quiet pond fed by a stream. There she dismounted, let Comanche drink, and tied his reins to a tree. Settling under the shade of an oak, she unwrapped her food and ate with surprising appetite, washing it down with cool stream water. For the first time in weeks, hunger returned. As the morning stretched on, Lydia wandered the banks, pondering her future. Clinton wouldn't let her take ranch duties, and household tasks were already divided among helpers. Isabel hinted it might soon be her turn to oversee the meals and housework, but even that wouldn't fill the emptiness. She needed something meaningful, something that mattered. Memories of her mother surfaced, soft quilts sewn with love, afternoons spent teaching a little girl simple stitches. That quilt, carried from Chicago, was meant for a child Lydia would never have, but the thought sparked an idea. Emily quilted, and perhaps she would teach her. Maybe quilts given away as her mother once did could bring purpose back into her days. The idea warmed her heart. With new determination, she gathered her things, ready to ride back to the ranch. The sun told her it was nearly noon, and for the first time in a long while she felt a small spark of hope. Chapter 7. Clinton watched as his wife rode away on the horse he had given her. He was worried about her. He knew she would be safe with Comanche, and she knew the hills where she was heading as well. He wished Lydia were happy. She had never truly shown happiness, even when she first arrived at the ranch 5 years prior. At the time, he had attributed it to the shock of her father dying, needing to travel quickly to Texas, and then the marriage soon after. She was always quiet and did not talk very much. About 6 months after their marriage, she became pregnant, and for the first time, Clinton saw a genuine smile on her face. But when she lost that baby a few months later, the smile went away. That was when he gave her Comanche. She loved that horse and would spend hours riding him almost daily, only stopping when she became pregnant again. After this fourth pregnancy, it was as if she were depressed, especially after the doctor told her there would be no more pregnancies. As much as Clinton wished Lydia had been able to carry a child to term, he felt grateful that Lydia was all right, and he hadn't lost her. He had not loved Lydia when they first married, but he had since developed a deep love for her and did not think he could bear the thought of losing her. He was sad that there would be no children, but he was glad he still had his wife. He knew he had been spending more time than usual away from the ranch house and Lydia, but he did not know how he could help her. He felt that at least he could be productive working on the ranch and making sure things ran as smoothly as possible. He did not know how else to manage the situation between them. Since her stroke, his mother rarely left her room and was cared for mostly by her nurse, yet Clinton knew she understood more than she let on. Each day he visited, she inquired about Lydia, and he offered the most hopeful answers he could, but Lydia also visited regularly, and Clinton was certain his mother had pieced together that all was not well. Clinton climbed onto his own horse and headed to a distant pasture to finish the fencing he had started the day before. His foreman, Devin, would be joining him, and they should be able to get it done before lunch. Then he could spend the afternoon training a new horse he was working with to cut cattle. Lydia would come to watch, as she sometimes did, as he trained the horse. He soon reached the area where he was fencing and saw that Devin was already there. He climbed off his horse, grabbed his tools, and walked over to where Devin was working. The two men greeted each other and started working on the fence in silence. They worked together well, each having their own job to do, but helping each other when needed. "Saw Lydia leaving on Comanche," Devin finally commented as he bent to cut a wire. "Yeah, she seemed glad to be allowed to ride again," Clinton said. "Got the go-ahead from the doctor yesterday." "Is she doing okay?" Devin asked, pausing in his work and looking straight at Clinton. "As well as can be expected, I guess." Clinton shrugged. He began digging a hole for the next post. "You do know you don't need to work as much as you're doing," Devin commented after a brief silence. "We have plenty of help. You could spend more time at the house with Lydia and your mother." "I'm not sure Lydia really wants me around." "She has barely talked to me since the miscarriage. Believe me, I'm sure your wife wants you around. But knowing her, she will not ask." Devin dropped a wooden pole into a hole he had just dug. "Emily is pregnant again." Clinton paused and looked at his friend. "Congratulations." He tried to put excitement into his voice. "I'm only telling you because Mrs. Young knows." "She has told Lydia by now." Clinton nodded. He measured the hole he was digging with his shovel and saw that it needed to be a little deeper, so he continued. "I was thinking about something. You and Lydia married so quickly, you really didn't have a chance to get to know each other or court her like you might have with a woman who lived close by. At the time, I didn't mind that. I was glad my father arranged for Lydia to come. I just wanted to work on the ranch. I didn't want to take the time to court a woman. When I first saw Lydia, the first thing I noticed about her was how beautiful she was. I have never regretted marrying her. You should take time and court Lydia now. Spend time with her. Go riding with her. She needs that more than we need you around the ranch. As I said, we have plenty of help and there are no major problems at the moment. Go spend some time with your wife. I promise you won't regret it." Clinton grunted, but he was seriously thinking about Devin's suggestion. He might have a point. Would spending time with Lydia help her? Could something that simple make her smile again? Chapter 8. The next morning, Lydia got up and dressed to go riding. She had wanted to talk to Clinton the night before about her plan to learn to quilt, but he had come to bed after she fell asleep. Yesterday afternoon, she'd gone to Emily's house and expressed her desire to learn to quilt. Emily was thrilled and excited to teach her. They agreed that in exchange for quilting lessons, she would help Emily with her children so she could work in her own vegetable garden, since she was having a tough time getting out there with her young children. As Lydia walked into the barn, she saw that Comanche was already saddled. Next to her horse was the horse Clinton usually rode, also saddled. Lydia looked around for her husband and did not see him. She reached up to greet her horse, giving him a carrot to eat, but wondering why her horse was already saddled for her. One of the first things Clinton taught her about riding was how to saddle a horse. Since a ranch hand would not always be around to do it for her, she needed to know how to do it herself. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. It was Clinton coming towards her. He was carrying a saddlebag. "Good morning, Lydia." He greeted her with his customary kiss on her cheek. "Are you planning on riding to the hills again today?" Lydia nodded. "Did you saddle Comanche for me?" "Thank you." "I did?" Clinton swung the saddlebag on the back of his horse and started to secure it to the saddle. "Can I join you this morning?" "Do you mean you want to come with me?" Lydia questioned, confused. "Don't you have a lot of work to do?" "I would like to come with you, yes," Clinton said. "There is a lot of work to do, But Devin reminded me that we have many hands to do the work, and I should let them earn their pay. Lydia was still confused that he wanted to come. He had not ridden with her since he had taught her to ride, unless it was around the ranch. Yes, you can come. She finally answered his question. She felt a glimmer of happiness that he wanted to spend time with her, but she quickly shoved it down deep inside. She could not allow herself to feel happy. It seemed that whenever she did, something bad would happen, like her mother dying, or her father dying, or losing so many babies. She sometimes wondered if she would wake up one day and find out that something had happened to Clinton. Mrs. Young packed us a lunch. "We can spend all day away from the ranch if you would like," Clinton said as he patted the saddlebag. "That sounds nice," she responded. Clinton helped her into the saddle in his usual way and then swung into his own. His horse was actually the older brother of her horse, with similar markings except for the missing white spot on his forehead. Clinton had named him Buck. He was an excellent cattle horse. They set out toward the distant hills. The ride was usually an hour's journey, but with their horses at full gallop, the time passed swiftly. Upon reaching the slopes, Clinton yielded the lead to Lydia, who guided him along the well-worn path that wound toward her cherished retreat. They had a wonderful morning together, and as they spent time with each other, Lydia started to feel strong feelings for him again. Clinton had spread a horse blanket onto the grass for them to sit on. At first, they sat next to each other without talking, simply enjoying the nature and its silence. Soon they started to converse. Their conversation centered on the ranch, his mother's well-being, and Clinton's recent reading of the latest letter from Jamie, who was doing well in the West with her new husband. They walked around the hills exploring. Lydia told him about her mother and how she had made quilts. She expressed her desire to learn to quilt and make quilts to give away. Clinton loved the idea and even suggested she use a spare room to sew in and set up her quilts. The room he suggested was the room she had wanted to turn into a nursery, and she became quiet again, although she nodded her head in agreement with the idea. She felt tears fill her eyes, and she turned to walk away quickly, not wanting Clinton to see her tears, but she felt his hand touch her arm. "It's okay, Lydia." Clinton pulled her into his arms and she cried as if she had never cried before. She cried for a long time and he held her, feeling sorrow for all of her losses. After a while, her tears subsided, and she started to move away from his arms, but he would not let her leave. "You don't need to grieve on your own, Lydia," Clinton said quietly. "I wish you would allow me into your life more often." Lydia felt confused at his words. "I have allowed you in my life." "I married you, didn't I?" "Yes, but I know you hold part of yourself back from me. I don't think I've ever seen you genuinely happy, except for the first time you found you were expecting. I know you have had losses in your life, but it isn't healthy for you to hold so much inside. I know I wasn't your first choice in a husband, but life hasn't been too bad here, has it? You have been a truly kind husband. I have been happy here, and I have grown to love the ranch." Clinton looked frustrated. "But I wasn't your first choice in a husband. I have often wondered, would you have married that other man in Chicago if your father hadn't died, and if he hadn't lost his tailor shop?" "I don't know," Lydia admitted. "It didn't work out that way, so I will never know. But I have not regretted marrying you. My father knew things about that man that I did not. I think the main reason he hadn't paid off the loan to your father was so he could have an excuse to get me away from Richard." Clinton continued to hold Lydia, and for a while they remained silent, lost in their own thoughts. Then Lydia felt Clinton's hand tilt her face up towards his. "May I kiss you?" he requested with a husky voice. Lydia nodded, and Clinton wiped her tears away from her cheeks with his thumbs. He then kissed her tenderly on her cheeks and then softly on her mouth. Lydia let her arms go around his neck and pulled him tightly to her. He rested his forehead on hers for a moment, and then she took his face gently between her hands and kissed him back. She encouraged him to kiss her passionately, which he did, and she melted against him as he did so. She had almost forgotten how powerful his kisses were. When Clinton kissed her, he always made her feel like she was the only woman that mattered to him. She always knew how he felt about her. She remembered his first real kiss. It happened on their wedding day in front of the minister, Clinton's family, and a few ranch hands. He had started the kiss out as a chaste one, but, as if he couldn't help it, he had turned it into a passionate kiss, and that one kiss had started the bond between them as husband and wife. For the first time since her latest miscarriage, she felt like everything would be all right. She may never be a mother, but she was married to a man who loved her very much. She decided right then to never take that gift for granted again. Chapter 9. Lydia was in the garden weeding the bean plants, and she was pleased with how the vegetables were doing. She heard a horse enter the ranch yard and stood up to see who would be visiting. They did not get many unannounced visitors. It was Mr. John Peterson, a man from town who worked for the mayor. Lydia walked over to greet him. "Hello, Mrs. Byron." Mr. Peterson returned the greeting. He did not get off his horse. "Is your husband around?" "No, he's out on the range somewhere. Is there something I can help you with?" Lydia asked. "I'm just going around giving a message about an event that will be happening in a few days." He reached down and handed her a folded sheet of paper. Lydia accepted it. "I have a lot of places to visit, so I need to go." He turned and rode his horse out of the yard and down the lane. Lydia walked up to the porch and sat down on a rocking chair in the shade. She opened up the paper and saw these words: "Wanted. Homes for 18 orphan children. A group of orphan children from the Children's Aid Society of New York will arrive in Maple Grove, Texas. These children are intelligent and well-disciplined. There will be both boys and girls of various ages. A local committee of Maple Grove will assist in selecting families in which to place these children. Applications will be accepted on Wednesday, May 24th at 10 a.m. in the town hall. The children will arrive on Friday, May 26th, and will be available to meet in the town hall. See and meet these children and hear the address of Mr. Thomas Carver, the children's placing agent, along with his wife, Mrs. Darlene Carver." Lydia folded the paper and tucked it into her apron pocket, intending to show Clinton later. It struck her as peculiar that a company of orphan children had been sent all the way from New York to their town in Texas. Still, she doubted it was a matter for them to consider. Perhaps, though, it might be fun to ride into town and watch the proceedings. She decided to take a break from her gardening and went inside for a drink. Mrs. Young gladly gave her a glass of cold lemonade she had prepared. Lydia took the cup and went back outside to sit in the rocking chair. She had almost finished her drink when she saw Clinton ride Buck into the yard. He saw her and waved, climbed off his horse, and tied it up in the shade of a nearby tree. He ran up the stairs and sat next to her. "How has your day been?" he asked her after giving her a quick kiss. "It's been a good day. We had a visitor from Maple Grove." She pulled out the paper about the orphan train. He dropped off this advertisement. She gave it to him and then sipped down the last of her lemonade. As she waited for him to read the paper, Mrs. Young came out with more lemonade and small cakes to share. "Thank you, Mrs. Young." Clinton nodded to the housekeeper. He began to ask her about his mother and spoke with her for a while about her care. When the housekeeper finally left, Lydia asked him what he thought about the information about the orphan train. "It's an interesting idea," Clinton answered her. "I wonder if there will be enough families to take in that many children." They sat in silence thinking, and then Clinton picked up the paper and read it again. "I have an idea," Clinton said as he set the paper aside. "Would you be interested in taking one of these orphan children, even a baby or a young child?" "Since we can't." "Are you being serious?" Lydia interrupted him. "I'm not sure I want to raise someone else's child." "These kids could come with major problems. What if the child comes with a type of problem we can't manage?" "I don't think that would happen if we got a young child or a baby. It looks to me like most of these children's parents have died or something like that. They just need a new home, a new family." Lydia began to wonder if this might be her only chance to become a mother. Maybe Clinton was right. Clinton changed the subject and began to discuss other topics. He asked her about her quilting and expressed a desire to see her first small quilt she was in the process of making. He wanted to know about the garden and whether she thought they would need to hire a young girl to help with the canning of all the vegetables in the fall. In between all the talking, Lydia was thinking about Clinton's suggestion. Suddenly, she had a peaceful feeling inside, and she knew this was the right thing to do, adopting a child. "I think we should," she added. "We should what?" "I think it's a great idea to take in a child. Let's see what we need to do to adopt one." It was worth it to see the smile spread across his face. Even though they never talked about it, she knew he was as disappointed as she was about their current family situation. "Tomorrow is Wednesday, the 24th. Let's go into town and apply for a child and see what happens," Clinton suggested, and Lydia agreed. The next morning, Lydia and Clinton set out for Maple Grove. The journey took more than an hour each way, so Lydia seldom made the trip unless it was truly necessary. A visit to town often meant the better part of the day was lost. This time, they planned to meet with the town council before stopping at the general store for supplies, and Clinton had a set of tools for the blacksmith to repair. He hoped to leave them there first and collect them again on their way home to the ranch. Applying for one of the orphan children was surprisingly easy. The men on the council knew them, and although they asked broad questions, they almost immediately gave approval for them to adopt a baby. They did warn them that there were only 2 children under the age of 2 available, and, since young children tended to be placed first, they should plan on the possibility of taking an older child. Clinton was open to the idea, but Lydia was adamant that she wanted to take only a baby or a young child. She did not care if it was a boy or a girl. She just wanted to be a mother. Lydia had an enjoyable day with Clinton. After the meeting, they did the shopping that they needed to do. Clinton encouraged her to purchase the things she might need for a baby because she had given away all the clothes and items she had made and purchased after the last miscarriage to a neighboring woman, but something held Lydia back. She was afraid that if she purchased anything and things didn't work out, she would be left with baby things that she would again need to give away. She told Clinton that they could purchase the things they needed after they adopted the child. They ate at the local boarding house's restaurant because the tools Clinton needed repairing were not yet ready. A few hours later, they were heading back to the ranch. Lydia had enjoyed this day immensely, and she started to feel close to her husband again. Chapter 10. 2 days later, Lydia was in the town hall sitting next to Clinton. Chairs were arranged in rows, and a small stage had been set up in front, with additional chairs placed on top. Lydia was surprised there were so many people there. She looked around and was amazed to see so many prominent people from the town, each holding a pack of papers like the ones they had, so she knew they were going to adopt too. She saw the Reverend, the mayor, the doctor, the general store owner, and all their wives. She saw her dear friend Amanda and greeted her with a hug. She was glad to hear Amanda had permission to adopt a young girl. Lydia had felt bad when she heard about the tragic death of Amanda's husband a few years ago, although she hadn't been able to be much of a comfort, since at the time she had been bedridden with a pregnancy that she had ended up losing. She watched as Amanda sat next to Craig Parker and wondered about their relationship with each other. Lydia noticed that the hall quieted as the doors opened, and a tall, thin man and heavy-set woman walked into the room, leading a group of children. She grabbed Clinton's hand without thinking, as she watched the man and woman direct the children to sit on the stage. As she looked at the available children, she saw the 2 babies she was expecting to be there, and all the other children were older than 2 years of age. She felt a distinct disappointment. The mayor stood and introduced the man and woman as Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Carver. He explained that this couple had been with the children on the train ever since they had left New York 10 days ago. The mayor then announced that Mr. Carver would be giving instructions concerning the children. Mr. Carver stood and began to speak. "I welcome you all and am thrilled with the interest and turnout we have this afternoon. This is truly a wondrous event for the children and for the town of Maple Grove. I want to thank the town committee for its part in helping these beautiful children find new homes. I know that everyone is anxious to begin, so those who are approved can start the process, but I must go over the ground rules and procedures. There are 2 key points. These girls and boys are hoping to find a new home. We have 18 children available, ranging in age from 6 months to 14 years. We are hopeful that all 18 will be placed right here in Maple Grove, but if that doesn't happen, we will continue on to the next town until they are all placed. We are allowing children 8 and older to make the decision whether they want to go with a family. If they feel uncomfortable in any way, we will not force them to go. The final decision is theirs. There will be a 1-year waiting period between child placement and legal adoption. We will be sending out a representative during the next year to check on the children. If at any time we feel dissatisfied with the child's care, we will remove the child from the home. Please be aware that even though this is rare, it has happened." Mr. Carver paused in his speaking to pull a handkerchief from his pocket to wipe perspiration from his neck and brow. "In order to avoid mass confusion, we will call each name that has a letter of recommendation in random order. Once a choice has been made, please move over to where my wife is sitting, and she will help you complete the paperwork." He pointed to a table that had been set up to one side of the room with Mrs. Carver sitting behind it. Lydia's heart sank even further when she realized how they were choosing the families to come to the stage. She waited anxiously, but just as the town council had warned Clinton and her, the 2 available babies were placed almost immediately. "I would like to go home," she whispered to Clinton, trying to hold back the tears gathering in her eyes. "We've lost our chance to adopt a baby." Clinton stood up and led Lydia off to the side of the room where they could talk without being overheard. He turned her to face him, placing his hands on both of her shoulders. He looked at her very seriously. "I would like you to consider something." He looked directly into her eyes. "Would you at least think about adopting an older child?" Lydia started to shake her head in denial of his request, But something in his eyes stopped her. She could tell he desperately wanted this. He wanted to add a child to their lives. She reminded herself that this would be her last chance to be a mother. Hoping she was making the right decision for herself, for Clinton, and for the child they might adopt, she nodded her head in the affirmative. Clinton's eyes lit up with joy and drew her close in a hug. Lydia had learned to treasure his hugs. When he hugged, he did it with his whole heart. "I will let you choose the child you will be comfortable with," he promised her. "No, we will choose the child together." Suddenly they heard their names called and they turned and walked toward the stage. Most of the younger children had already been placed. Her eyes were drawn to a young boy who appeared to be around 8 years old. He was very scruffy looking. His clothes looked too large for him and his hair desperately needed a good cut. But when she caught his eyes, he smiled shyly at her. She walked towards him, leaving Clinton to follow. "What is your name?" she asked him. He looked down and did not answer. "His name is James, ma'am," said an older boy sitting next to him. "He's my younger brother." "Oh my," Lydia said. The young boy had a brother. The last thing she wanted to do was split up two brothers. "Are there just the two of you?" Clinton asked the older boy, and he nodded. "What is your name?" They learned that the older boy was named Joseph. He was 10 years old, and his brother James was 6. Lydia and Clinton talked to the two boys for a while. They learned that their last name was Gray. They had been living in the orphanage for a little over a year. Joseph answered their questions willingly enough, but when Lydia gently questioned him about his parents, he refused to talk about them. Lydia stood back and watched as Clinton interacted with the two boys, and she instinctively knew that they should consider adopting them. When Clinton looked at her to see what she was thinking, she pulled him aside and whispered, "Let's take both of them. They shouldn't be split up." Clinton nodded his head in agreement and walked over to Mr. Carver to see if that would be an option. As their papers stated, they could only adopt one child. He soon received permission to adopt both of them. The two boys agreed to come with them, and James seemed extremely interested in the idea of living on a ranch with cows and horses. Joseph didn't seem to show any emotion, although he readily agreed to live with them. The paperwork for the two boys was soon completed, and the four of them, now a new family, walked out of the town hall and over to the general store to purchase complete sets of clothes for both boys. Lydia helped Clinton load the wagon with their purchases, and then he helped the boys climb into the back. James had started to talk more, so Lydia could tell that he was starting to feel comfortable with his new situation. Joseph was polite but distant. He only talked when he was spoken to. It seemed to Lydia that he was not happy with his new circumstances. On the way to the ranch, Clinton and Lydia did their best to get to know their new sons. They asked them what they liked to do, what their favorite food was, and what they enjoyed doing the most at the orphanage. James always answered their questions with detailed answers. Joseph answered them only when pressed. Lydia hoped that in the future, he would feel more comfortable with them. At the ranch, Clinton dropped them off at the front of the house, and Mrs. Young came out of the house to greet the new arrivals. She had been supportive and excited to have a child around the ranch again, and she expressed her happiness when she learned that they had adopted 2 older children. Mrs. Young had raised 3 children of her own, but they had all moved away from Maple Grove. When her husband died, she decided to sell her home and take the job Clinton offered her as a housekeeper and cook for Clinton's family. James took to Mrs. Young immediately. When she offered cookies and milk for a snack, he took her hand and willingly followed her. Joseph's eyes showed interest in the idea of cookies, but he immediately stifled it. Lydia noticed that he did follow Mrs. Young, though. When both boys were in the house, Lydia turned to pick up the purchases. "Life is going to be very different," she commented to Clinton with a smile. "I hope Joseph is going to like it here. He seems so reserved. We just need to give him time. He'll adjust." Clinton picked up the last box and nodded to a hired hand who offered to take care of the wagon and horses. He followed Lydia into the house. They walked into the kitchen and set their purchases on the table. Lydia started to put away the food that they had bought while Clinton sat down at the table with the boys to enjoy a cookie. When they were finished with the snack, Lydia turned to them. "Would you like to see your rooms?" she asked the boys. James jumped up, showing excitement at the idea of seeing something new, but Joseph just sat there, looking very hesitant to follow. "You know," Clinton drawled, staying at the table with Joseph, "if there is a problem or something is wrong, it is better to talk about it and let us know than sit and suffer in silence." Joseph nodded, showing that he understood. "Would it be okay if James and I shared a room?" "Of course," Lydia agreed. We have a room that has 2 beds. We can put you both in that room." Joseph almost smiled at her words and got up to follow them. Lydia wanted to put them in the room near her and Clinton's, and not the room she had planned for a future baby. She hadn't given up hope yet. The room she led them to had 2 beds with a chest at the end of the beds to hold clothes. There were also hooks that lined a wall, as well as bookshelves filled with children's books. In fact, Clinton had placed his belongings in the room he had used as a boy. There were his toys, books, and a few games. Lydia was already planning to make 2 new quilts for their beds. When they entered the room, James immediately chose the bed closest to the window and sat on it, bouncing joyfully. Joseph placed a small bundle he had brought from the orphanage on the other bed. "Would you like me to help you unpack?" Lydia offered, but Joseph refused, putting his bundle under the pillow. She wondered what was in the bundle, yet knew she would need to be patient with Joseph, so she changed the subject. "Maybe we can show you both around the ranch," Lydia suggested, and Clinton agreed with her. "Yes, that's a fine idea. We can show you the barn and the animals." "Will we get to see horses and cows?" James asked with excitement as he jumped off his bed and headed towards the doorway. "Horses, cows, and other animals," Clinton said. "Let's go." He led the boys from their bedroom through the kitchen to the outdoors, with Lydia following. Chapter 11. Lydia could tell Clinton enjoyed showing the boys around the ranch. They slowly walked towards the barn, and, on their way, Clinton showed them the large vegetable garden. Lydia pulled up small carrots to let Joseph and James taste them. James was fascinated by the idea that all the vegetables he had eaten his entire life really came from the ground, rather than the city grocer. She could tell Joseph enjoyed the carrot because he ate the entire thing but did not speak about it. Clinton pointed to a large oak tree near the house and showed them the remains of a treehouse he had built when he was a boy. "Can we fix it up?" James asked him. "How did you get clear up there?" "There used to be pieces of wood that led up the trunk to the treehouse, kind of like a ladder," Clinton explained. "Maybe we can make the house sturdy to play in." Again, James was the only one who expressed any type of excitement at the idea. Joseph just listened and looked around. When they finally arrived at the barn, both boys hung back as Clinton showed them the large animals inside. There were horses and a cow in its own stall. "I didn't know cows were so large," Joseph commented with fascination as he looked at the cow. Clinton explained that this cow had cut its leg and was in the barn while the leg healed. Most of the time, the cows spent time out on the open range. The cattle dog greeted Clinton and allowed the boys to pet her. She then laid down on a bed of straw in the corner of the barn. "She's due to have pups any day now," Clinton told the boys. "She doesn't really want to move around much." Lydia watched as James slowly walked up to one of their smaller horses. He seemed fascinated with all the animals that were in the barn, but he couldn't take his eyes off the horse. It was a brown-spotted Indian pony that Clinton kept around for the ranch hand's children. It was a good horse to learn to ride on. "Would you boys like to ride a horse?" Clinton questioned them. "Yes," James shouted, and even Joseph showed interest, though he still didn't say anything. The boys watched as Clinton led the horse out of her stall. "What's his name?" James asked. "This horse is a girl." "Her name is Butternut," Clinton responded as he started to saddle her. "That's a weird name," Joseph scoffed. "I guess it is," Clinton smiled at him. "This horse used to be owned by a family that lives on the other side of the valley." The kids named her. "We just inherited the name." Lydia and the boys watched as Clinton finished saddling the horse. He led Butternut out of the barn. "Who wants to go first?" "I do," James shouted as he jumped up and down as if he could not contain his excitement. "Okay then," Clinton agreed and swung the boy up on the horse's back. He led the horse around in a large circle, all the while quietly giving instructions to James and cautioning him to sit still so he would not scare the horse. A few minutes later, Clinton let Joseph have a turn. After a while, he allowed Joseph to ride the horse on his own, and Lydia noticed that he smiled the entire time. After about an hour of horse riding, Clinton showed the boys how to care for the horse and saddle after a ride. Then they continued the tour of the ranch. While they were walking towards a large herd of cattle held in a huge meadow surrounded by a fence, Joseph finally asked his first question. "What are we supposed to call you?" he asked. "Well, that's a good question," Clinton said. "I guess since you already had a Pa and Ma, those names have been taken?" Joseph nodded as he shuffled along, looking at the ground. "Why don't you call us by our given names for now?" Lydia suggested. "When you both feel more comfortable with us, you could call us Mom and Dad." "Those are different names than what you called your Ma and Pa." Joseph did not respond, and Clinton changed the subject. Do you want to see some baby calves? They spent the rest of the afternoon wandering around the ranch. The boys were introduced to the ranch hands. They met the foreman, Devin, who was fixing a fence where the calves were kept. When they finally started to head back to the ranch house, they stopped at Emily's small home and introduced the boys to Emily and her children. The next day was Sunday, and Lydia and Clinton took the boys to the church located just outside of Maple Grove. Lydia could tell that Joseph and James were not used to sitting for lengthy periods of time. They were very restless. She was glad when the sermon had finally ended and the boys could go outside, because she had such a challenging time keeping them still. Lydia allowed the boys to run around for a while before they needed to head back to the ranch. She saw her good friend Amanda and discovered that she had been able to adopt a little girl named Grace. Craig Parker had adopted her brother Jeremy. She was pleasantly surprised to hear Amanda and Craig had chosen to marry in order to keep the children together. "I would like to hear the story about that decision," Lydia exclaimed to her friend as she hugged her and expressed her congratulations. "We felt it would be best not to separate them," Amanda explained, but she blushed at Lydia's words. Lydia noticed Joseph talking to Jeremy. "You two obviously know each other," she commented to Joseph. "We slept in the same room at the orphanage," Joseph explained. "We should get our children together sometime soon," Lydia suggested to Amanda. "That's a great idea," Amanda agreed. "They can also see each other when school starts in the fall." The two women continued to talk while the boys started a small game of tag. Lydia noticed that while they talked, Amanda kept glancing over at her new husband Craig, who was talking with a group of men nearby. She blushed when Craig noticed, smiled at her, and winked. Lydia was glad that her friend had found happiness again. Chapter 12. One morning, after the boys had been at the ranch for about a week, Lydia was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Young make breakfast. She had heard the boys talking as she walked past their room, and she wanted to have everything ready before they came to eat. They would have a busy day today, and she wanted to get breakfast over quickly. She planned to go over to Emily's house with the boys to do quilting. Joseph and James seemed to enjoy being around Emily's children and playing with them, even though they were younger than the boys. She could tell that they were accustomed to being around younger children, and she assumed it was because they had lived in the orphanage. She looked up as the boys came in noisily, and they both immediately sat at the table. They had dressed, and she could tell they had washed their faces and combed their hair because water had dripped down the front of their shirts. James felt comfortable living with them right away. He loved to go out to the barn and see the animals and was always asking permission to do so. The cattle dog had puppies the day after they had come to the ranch, and he had already claimed one for his own, with Clinton's permission. The day before, he had spent the entire afternoon in the barn, watching the mother dog taking care of her puppies and holding the puppy he had chosen when she would let him. Joseph was also showing signs that he was feeling more at ease around them, although he remained quiet. He was a profoundly serious boy, acting like a miniature adult, not a child. She hoped that as he felt more comfortable living with them, he would start to act like the 10-year-old boy he was. He did not talk very much. Lydia and Clinton had decided that they needed to find out what they could about their previous life, and had planned to try to talk to Joseph alone today while James went to the barn to check on the puppies. They had already tried to talk to both of them, but Joseph had shown anger at their questions and had refused to let James answer. Lydia felt strongly that they needed to know their story so they could help both boys adjust better. When they signed the papers that Mrs. Carver gave them, she had also provided them with a folder that included a brief history of their lives. However, the information in it was limited, with most of it focusing on their time at the orphanage. The papers had shown that their parents were dead. Their father had died in a factory accident, and their mother had died while giving birth a few years ago. After their father died, the boys had been taken care of by an aunt who eventually placed them in the orphanage. If their mother died from childbirth that long ago, did that mean there was another sibling? Why did the aunt give them up? Lydia felt they needed to know so they could help the boys move on, especially Joseph. After a lively breakfast, Mrs. Young willingly walked James to the barn to allow Lydia and Clinton time alone with Joseph. Clinton started the conversation with Joseph. "How do you like living here?" he questioned the boy. "Do you and James have everything you need?" Joseph nodded. He was sitting in his chair in a defiant position, his hands clutched in front of him, his eyes looking down at the table. He was not happy about not being allowed to go to the barn with his brother. "I thought we could try horseback riding again." Clinton tried to continue the conversation. "You did an excellent job that first time. Would you like that?" Again, Joseph nodded, although it looked like he was agreeing because it was expected of him. Lydia reached out to touch his arm. "I love to ride, Joseph." I ride in the hills nearby, Lydia told him. After you have had a few more lessons, maybe we could go on some horseback rides together. This time Joseph did not respond but kept his eyes on the table. Lydia decided that since the small talk was not getting them anywhere, they might as well approach the real topic. Joseph, we would like to ask you some questions about your parents and your aunt. Would that be okay? I don't want to talk about them, Joseph muttered. She ignored his comment. We would like to know what happened to them. She pushed the papers that Mrs. Carver had given them toward him. It says here both your father and mother are dead. Is this true? Joseph stared at his hands for a long time, but after a few moments, Lydia thought she saw a slight nod. What happened to your father? Clinton asked. He worked in a factory. There was an accident. He went to work one day, and I never saw him again. I don't know what happened. Aunt Catherine took care of us when Pa was working, and we never went back home after Pa died. We stayed with her. I'm sorry, Joseph, Lydia whispered to him. I am sure that was hard. She waited and then asked, What about your mother? Ma died after Lizzie was born. So you have a sister? Clinton asked. Yeah, Aunt Catherine kept her. Lydia and Clinton looked at each other in disbelief. Do you mean your aunt kept your sister but sent you and James to the orphanage? Lydia asked, trying not to sound angry at the idea. Joseph nodded, still keeping his eyes down at his lap. Do you know why your aunt didn't keep you boys? Clinton asked him. Joseph shrugged his shoulders. We were too much trouble. She was always yelling at us for making messes and not staying clean. How old is Lizzie, Joseph? Lydia asked. The boy shrugged his shoulders again. Maybe 3. Is your aunt married? Do you have... Lydia started to ask, but Joseph shook his head at the question, then suddenly sat up straight and looked Clinton right in the eyes. I don't want to be adopted. I had a ma, I had a pa, I don't need new ones. When I'm old enough, I'm going back to New York to take care of my sister. He got up and ran out of the kitchen door to the outdoors. Lydia stood up as if to follow him in concern, but Clinton touched her arm. He'll be okay. Let him go. Sit down. We need to talk about this. Lydia sat back down with a sigh. Well, it sure explains a lot. James seems happy to be here. Joseph is here until he is old enough to leave. I wonder why James isn't as angry as Joseph is. Joseph is protecting his brother. That's what big brothers do. Clinton leaned towards Lydia and looked into her eyes. I am not sure how you will feel about this, but I would like to hire a private investigator and find out about their sister. We need to make sure she is cared for. He took her hand, and Lydia grasped it like a lifeline as she agreed. I think that is a good idea, Lydia nodded. She shouldn't have split them up like that. It made her sick to think a woman would give up her own kin like their aunt had done. She hoped that if they ever found out the real reason, it would make sense. Lydia stood and started to pace the kitchen floor. How long do you think it will take before you can find someone to help us? I know of someone already who lives in New York. His name is Bill Quinn. I am sure he can help us. I will write a letter at once and send a ranch hand to town today to mail it. I will also contact the orphanage and see if they know their aunt's address. I have an idea. Lydia turned toward Clinton with a light in her eyes. Why don't we see if their aunt would be willing to move here with their sister? We could give her a job. The boys would still live with us, and they would all be near each other. That is a good idea, Clinton nodded. I am sure there is something I could think up to help their aunt earn money. Part of it could be room and board. There is that old house the foreman used to use. We could fix that up for her. Lydia was starting to get excited. It's a bit small, but I think we could make it work. Clinton stood up and walked to where Lydia was pacing. Lydia, don't allow yourself to get too excited. We don't know all the circumstances as to why she gave the boys up. She might not want any contact with them. She might not agree to come. We might not even be able to find her. She tried to look understanding and not to feel too discouraged by his words. I know this is the right thing to do. Perhaps if we can at least stay in contact with their aunt, Joseph will accept his new situation here. Do you think we should inform Joseph about our plans? Or should we wait until we know for sure what the circumstances are? Clinton shook his head. We need to be honest with him. He trusted us enough to tell us. Now we need to show him our trust. Chapter 13. That evening at dinner, Clinton explained to both boys their plan. For the first time, Lydia saw a full smile that lit up Joseph's face. Do you mean it? He questioned them as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're going to find our aunt and Lizzie? Yes, Clinton said. If we can find your aunt, we are hoping she will want to come live here. Then you boys can be reunited with your sister. I don't know if she will want to come, James said in a quiet voice. Aunt Catherine didn't like us too much. Joseph slugged his brother in the arm. She has to come. I want to see Lizzie again, he protested. Don't hit your brother. Lydia automatically chastised Joseph as she watched James rub his arm. James could be right. She might choose not to come. Does this mean you won't adopt us? Joseph questioned, redirecting the subject off himself. Lydia felt a sense of sadness at his question, especially because he sounded so happy about it. No, Clinton answered him. Your aunt gave up her rights to you. We have papers that state you are both our sons, but we think it will be good for you to still have contact with your other family. Joseph hesitated, then nodded his head in understanding. When do you think she can get here? It could be a few months down the road, Clinton explained. I sent a letter today to a private investigator who lives in New York, and a letter to the orphanage you both lived in. All of this will take a while. Dinner time that evening was one of the best they had had together since the boys came. Joseph began to open up and provided them with more information about their sister. Lydia marveled that he did not show any anger toward his aunt for making the decision she had made, but he continuously expressed happiness at the prospect of being able to see his sister in the future. The next month was some of the happiest times Lydia had had in a long time. Now that Joseph had told them his story and heard about their plans for his aunt and sister, he allowed himself to relax and started to enjoy living at the ranch as much as James did. Joseph learned how to ride a horse very quickly, and he was soon riding all over the ranch with Clinton. Sometimes he would leave early in the morning when Clinton did and would stay out all day. James preferred to stay close to the ranch house. He began spending a lot of time with Clinton's mother, Isabel, visiting her daily in her various rooms. She was bedridden by this time and had officially turned over the running of the house to Lydia. She would read to him and tell him stories about her early life in England and how they came to America and started the ranch. James started to call her Grandma, which delighted Isabel. Lydia started to feel like her days were too busy. She didn't have as much time to ride in the hills on Comanche as she used to, and she missed that, but she enjoyed her new responsibilities of running the house and taking care of the boys. She also spent time quilting a little each day, developing her skills in the art. One day, Lydia asked Mrs. Young to make fried chicken, potato salad, and rolls. She had decided it would be fun to have a picnic and spend the day at her favorite place, away from the ranch with Clinton and the boys. When she suggested her idea at breakfast, both boys shouted with excitement. At first, Clinton looked like he was going to argue, but he then backed down and seemed as excited as the boys were. After Lydia had collected the picnic lunch, she went to the barn where she found Clinton and the boys saddling the horses. Comanche was already saddled and waiting by the fence with Clinton's horse. She put the lunch in a saddle pack and then watched as Clinton taught James the last steps in saddling Butternut. She enjoyed watching him with the boys. She saw James turn and jump on Clinton's back and watched Clinton turn around to grab him and did some guy punching with the boy. Joseph was standing a few feet away watching them. He included himself in the mock fight when Clinton lightly punched him on the shoulder. She had always felt a deep regret at not being able to give him a son, but now they had two. Clinton was a good father. He had been able to accept both boys as if they were his own and insisted everyone do the same. When he introduced them to others, he would let them know that they were his sons, and he would say it with pride in his voice. He was a good man, and she felt blessed to be married to him. For the first time, Lydia was able to admit to herself that she was glad she had listened to her father and married Clinton. She had felt unhappy for so long that she had almost forgotten what real happiness felt like. She was starting to realize that she had a good life. Yes, she had many losses, but she loved living in Texas on this ranch. She loved Clinton very much. She made a vow to herself right then that she would put her past behind her and focus on her future with Clinton and the boys. Slowly, she walked towards Clinton. At that moment, Clinton saw her and slowly stood upright, with each boy's head under his arms. He let them go as she walked right up in front of him. She put her arms around him and gave him a hug, lightly kissing his cheek. He stood still for a moment and then hugged her back tightly. "This is the first time you have done that," he whispered to her. "Done what?" She was confused by his words. "You have never hugged me on your own. You have never initiated it before." At first, Lydia didn't know what he meant, but then it dawned on her what he was saying. She only hugged or kissed him when he came to her first. What he was saying was true. She started to say something to apologize when she noticed Joseph and James watching them very intently. "Are you ready to go on our outing?" she questioned them. They both smiled their approval, and soon all four of them were on their horses and heading towards her favorite place. It was a wonderful day for all four of them. They took their time riding to the stream because James was still learning how to control a horse, but it was relaxing. Lydia was able to see that both boys were enjoying the outing, especially Joseph. When they arrived at the spring, they tied their horses to the nearby trees. The boys immediately started to play in the water. Clinton spread a blanket on the grassy riverbank, and both he and Lydia settled down next to each other. Lydia eventually became drowsy and took a short nap. When she awoke, she noticed that Clinton had taken off his boots and rolled up his pants. He was in the river and looked as wet as the boys did. Lydia enjoyed watching them. She wished this day would never end. She wished she knew what the future would bring. Lydia noticed that James needed a haircut. His dark blonde hair fell in his eyes, the hair curling at the base of his neck from being wet. James looked up at Clinton with joy and trust in his eyes. He had a unique ability to adapt to whatever situation he was in, to just enjoy it, to have fun. He was a very trusting boy. Joseph was different in that he did not trust easily. He had been through too much, losing his mother, then his father, then his aunt, giving him and his brother up for whatever reason, but choosing to keep his younger sister. She wondered what went through his mind when he thought about his aunt's decision. Was he angry with her, or was he just angry at the entire situation? Soon the boys and Clinton came over and collapsed on the blanket, pretending to complain that they were starving and asking when Lydia was going to feed them. She just laughed and got out their lunch. They enjoyed fried chicken, Mrs. Young's famous potato salad, along with rolls, fruit, and cookies for dessert. After lunch, the boys started to explore the land around them, while Clinton sat with Lydia on the blanket. James kept returning to show them a neat rock he found, or wanting to know the name of a plant he had picked. Joseph explored until he got too far away, and Clinton had to call him back. Finally, Clinton suggested it was time to return to the ranch. Lydia wanted to protest, but knew he was right. It would take a while to get back to the ranch, and she knew Clinton liked to be around for the evening chores. Chapter 14. When they returned to the ranch in the late afternoon, Clinton offered to tend to her horse and told Lydia to head on to the house. With the boys lingering in the barn to help him, she slipped inside, grateful for a little time to work on her quilting before supper. Upon entering the kitchen, Lydia was greeted by Mrs. Young, who handed her a letter several pages thick. "This was delivered from town a few hours ago," she explained. "It looks like it is from the investigator you hired." Mrs. Young was aware of their plans to find the boy's aunt. Lydia held the letter in her hands and sat down on a kitchen chair. "I'd better let Clinton know." She was about to get up to go get him when Mrs. Young sat down beside her and grasped her hand. "I know this is hard for you, but you are doing the right thing," Mrs. Young said softly. "It is good to get the truth. Their aunt cannot legally take the boys from you, not when she voluntarily gave them up." Lydia nodded, and the two women sat together in silence. Eventually, Mrs. Young stood to make her some tea, and Lydia sipped it gratefully, enjoying the strong flavor of a mix of peppermint and other herbs that they grew in their gardens. "Thank you for the tea," Lydia finally said, as she got up from the chair with the envelope in her hand and headed outside towards the barn. When she arrived, she found Clinton with Joseph and James. They had just finished taking care of the last horse, and she waited until she knew Clinton was through, keeping the envelope behind her back. She wanted to talk to Clinton about it privately before they shared the information they would be learning about Joseph. Clinton turned and saw her. He greeted her with a smile, but the smile faded as he saw her expression. "Is something wrong, dear?" he asked. She shook her head. "I have something to show you privately." She withdrew the envelope, being careful to make sure that the boys did not see it. She could tell he immediately knew what it was. "Joseph, why don't you and James go check on those puppies?" Clinton suggested. "I think they might be old enough to take one or two of them and play with them on the porch in the shade." Joseph liked that idea, and soon both boys had a small puppy in their arms and were heading towards the house. "Mrs. Young gave this to me. She said it was delivered this afternoon." She handed him the envelope. He took it and guided her to his office. They both sat down, and he opened the letter. He read it quickly and then reread it, taking his time. It was all Lydia could do not to snatch the letter from him and read it herself. She stood up and started to pace, trying to be patient. Clinton sighed. "I don't know if this is good news or not." He stopped her as she passed him in her pacing and pulled her down beside him. "What did he say?" she questioned, finally losing patience. "Did he find their aunt?" "He says he went to the orphanage the boys had been staying at. He was able to verify their story. Their father did pass away in a factory accident, and their mother died after the birth of their sister. Their aunt, who was caring for them when their father died, did give up her rights to them, but not for the reason that Joseph thought. The orphanage was able to give him the address of their aunt, and he paid her a visit. Evidently, she had been engaged to be married, and that was the main reason she gave up the boys. Her new husband did not want to raise another man's sons. Their aunt was able to convince him to allow her to keep the baby, but now things have changed." For a moment, Clinton stopped talking and glanced through the letter again. What has changed? Lydia knew that if their aunt were married, she would not want to move to Texas. Clinton sighed. She is expecting their first child. Her husband is insisting she give up Lizzie. Clinton turned to Lydia and grasped her hand. "Lydia, when her husband heard that we hired an investigator to find the boy's sister, he insisted that she be sent to us, or, if we don't want her, that she be taken to the orphanage." Lydia could not believe what she was hearing. How could someone be so heartless that he would insist on his own wife giving up her own kin? From what Lydia understood, the boy's aunt had probably raised this girl since birth. "We only have a few days to decide, dear," Lydia heard Clinton say through her thoughts. "Of course we want her," Lydia stated very firmly. "I am just trying to understand." "I know. I am trying to do the same." Clinton folded the papers and placed them back in the envelope. The letter is written in 2 parts, as if Mr. Quinn wrote the first part, intending to mail it, but then he received more information and included it at the last minute. In the second part, the investigator informed me that he has talked to Mr. Carver from the orphanage, and they are willing to arrange for Lizzie to be brought to a town close to Maple Grove, because they are bringing another group of orphans next month. "I'm surprised he found her so quickly." "I thought it would take much longer than this," Lydia commented. "I will immediately send another letter and let him and the orphanage know we will take the boy's sister. If they can get her close to Maple Grove, that would be great. We can travel to get her. Mr. Quinn just needs to let us know when they are planning to leave." Lydia sat in silence for a while, thinking about everything she had just learned. If she were newly married to a man who was insisting she give up her niece and nephews, would she do it? She knew immediately that she would not, but she also reminded herself that they really didn't know all the circumstances. She tried not to judge the boy's aunt or the decisions she had made. She may have had a challenging time caring for all 3 children. Maybe her new husband was not able to find a decent job to pay for all their expenses. They may never know all the reasons why their aunt made the choices she did. Chapter 15. A month had passed since Clinton sent the second letter off to Mr. Quinn. One morning, Lydia and Clinton decided to spend the day in Maple Grove with the boys. Every day, all Joseph could talk about was seeing his sister again. He didn't know what they had learned from the first letter because both Lydia and Clinton felt it would be best to wait until they had all the information. What if their aunt's husband changed his mind? Lydia was about to tell Joseph what they knew. He was driving them crazy with questions, but Clinton still felt it was best to wait until they knew all the information concerning his sister. At breakfast, Lydia and Clinton told the boys they were going to drive to Maple Grove to spend the day. Both boys were excited about the trip, and for the first time, Joseph did not bring up the subject of his aunt and sister at the meal. Soon after breakfast, they were on their way to Maple Grove. Lydia enjoyed hearing the boys chatter about various subjects. James kept asking if they could stop so he could explore. Joseph wanted to know if they would be able to see his friends from the orphanage while they were in town. When they finally arrived in Maple Grove, Clinton pulled the wagon in front of the blacksmith shop. He wanted to look at some tools that the blacksmith had made. The plan was that Lydia would take the boys to the general store to purchase supplies, and they would meet at the restaurant in the boarding house in an hour to have lunch. Clinton helped Lydia down from the wagon, and both boys jumped down from the back. After making sure she understood the time they were to meet Clinton, Lydia took James's hand and led him and Joseph toward the general store. There were quite a few customers in the store when Lydia and the boys entered, which surprised her, as she usually had the undivided attention of the storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Estelle Davis, when she shopped. Lydia felt relieved that it was so busy. She did not want to deal with Mrs. Davis's nosy questions today. Lydia helped the boys pick out new shirts. She handed a list of food items that Mrs. Young needed to a young girl named Anna, who was also from the orphanage and had been adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Davis. Lydia selected new fabrics for the quilts she was working on for the boys and took her chosen items to the front counter to make the purchase. "Do we have any mail?" she asked Mr. Davis, who was behind the counter. "Actually, something just came for you today," he said, as he turned around to retrieve a letter from a slot that held the town's mail. "It is marked important, so I was going to send a runner to your ranch this afternoon with it." "I'm glad we're here now, and you don't need to do that," Lydia responded as she accepted the letter. She quickly glanced at the envelope and saw that it was from New York. She knew that the letter they were waiting for had arrived. "Is that letter about Lizzie?" Joseph asked as he stood next to her, trying to see the writing on the letter. Lydia hesitated and then decided to be up front with the child. "It is. I will pay for the things we need, and then we can go to the boarding house for lunch. We will let Clinton read the letter, and then we will tell you what was written. Why don't you get James? We will leave as soon as we are finished here." Joseph ran to get his brother from the back of the store. James had been looking through a box of colorful glass marbles. Lydia paid for the items she needed and arranged for them to be loaded onto the wagon when Clinton could bring it by. Soon Lydia was walking along the boardwalk toward the boarding house with Joseph and James. She saw Clinton standing in front of the building, talking to a man she did not recognize. "We've got a letter," Joseph shouted as he ran up to Clinton. He turned and smiled but looked at Lydia with a question in his eyes. She nodded her head, subtly letting him know the letter was from Mr. Quinn. "Can you read it and let us know what he says?" Joseph wanted to know. "Did he find our aunt? What about Lizzie? Are they going to come to Texas?" "Hold on, son." Clinton placed his hand on Joseph's shoulder to settle him down. "Let me read it first, and then I will tell you and James what Mr. Quinn has to say." Lydia gestured toward the door of the boarding house. "Let's go inside. We can find a quiet room to talk about this." Clinton agreed and opened the door to let his family inside the cool building. Miss Sally, one of the sisters who owned the boarding house, greeted them. When Clinton asked for a place for privacy, she led them into a well-kept parlor, agreeing to keep other people out of the room while they talked. Lydia sat on a sofa next to James, and Clinton sat on another sofa across from her with Joseph nearby. She handed the letter to Clinton. "Joseph, I need to read this letter on my own first. You will need to be patient. I will let you know what it says when I'm done," Clinton instructed the boy. Joseph looked like he wanted to argue, but he quickly nodded his head and sat back on the sofa, obviously knowing Clinton would not be swayed. They sat quietly while Clinton opened the letter and started to read. The only sounds Lydia could hear were a clock ticking and James's feet swinging back and forth against the sofa. The letter had many pages, and Lydia wished she could look at those Clinton had already read, but she knew she needed to be patient along with the boys. Soon Clinton set the pages down. "This letter does have information about your aunt," Clinton said, looking at Lydia. She knew he would tell the boys all they knew. "The man we hired is Mr. Bill Quinn. He went to the orphanage you lived at and was able to find out where your aunt is living." "Did he see Lizzie?" Joseph immediately questioned. "Is my sister okay?" Lydia leaned closer to Joseph. "Clinton will explain everything to you, but you need to allow him to talk. You can ask questions when he's finished, okay?" Joseph nodded his head and closed his mouth tight as if he was going to do his best not to open it again. "Mr. Quinn was able to find your aunt, and he found out the reason she gave you two up." "Did you know your aunt had gotten married?" Clinton asked. "Yeah, she was seeing someone when Pa was alive. I don't think Pa liked him too much." Clinton continued. "Well, she must have married him, and he was the one who insisted you both go to the orphanage. At first, he agreed that your aunt could keep your sister, but Mr. Quinn found out that your aunt is now expecting a child, and her new husband doesn't want to keep your sister either." Lydia could tell that what Clinton said was making Joseph angry, and he was trying not to cry. "Why didn't he want us?" he asked, trying to understand. "Some men feel that they can only raise their own children," Lydia tried to explain, although she was trying to understand herself. "What's going to happen to Lizzie then?" James asked. "I think we should adopt her too, like we did you boys," Clinton suggested. "What do you think of that?" "Really?" Joseph questioned as if he could not believe what he was hearing. "You would want another child?" Lydia leaned forward to try to explain their position. "I don't know if you can understand this, Joseph, but I want to try to explain something to you. I am not able to have children. When Clinton and I realized we would never have our own, we decided we wanted to share our lives with children who don't have a family. That is why we adopted you and James. We would like to add to our family and adopt your sister. We will never be like your own mother and father, and we don't want to try to take their places, but maybe we can form a new family. You did not have parents, we did not have children. We have now adopted you both. but we have enough room in our home and in our hearts for your sister. Don't you think we can help each other?" Joseph started to smile as he listened to Lydia. He then stood next to her. "I'd like you to adopt my sister." Lydia also stood, and for the first time, Joseph accepted a hug from her. Chapter 16. That evening, after the boys were tucked into bed, Lydia and Clinton crawled into their own. When they returned from town, Clinton had let both his mother and Mrs. Young know about the new addition who would be arriving next week. Both women were excited about Lizzie coming and were glad things worked out so that the boys and their sister could be reunited and stay together. The Orphan train was planning to stop at a town that was about an hour-long train ride away. They had decided to take the entire family to pick up Lizzie. Clinton felt the boys should be there when Lizzie got off the train, and Lydia agreed. Clinton was leaning against the bedboard, reading a newspaper he had picked up in town that day. Lydia had been trying to read a book, but she eventually set it aside because she could not concentrate on it. She looked at Clinton and marveled at how much their lives had changed in the last few months. They went from just the two of them to adopting Joseph and James, and now adopting Lizzie. Even though there had been many adjustments, and she knew that there would be many more, she absolutely loved being a mother. She remembered that she had kept the room closest to Clinton's and hers as the nursery, and now she was glad she had not turned it into her quilting room. That room would be Lizzie's by tomorrow. Clinton noticed that she wasn't reading, so he set his newspaper aside. "What are your thoughts?" he asked her. "I was just thinking how much our lives have changed over the last few months, and all for the good." She turned to him and placed her hand lightly on his chest. Clinton reached for her hand as if he was going to remove them, but thinking better of the situation, he covered hers with his own. "I have been thinking the same. Our lives are definitely different from what they used to be." "It's been a long time," Lydia hinted, changing the subject. She was reminding him that he had not come to her since her miscarriage. "I have missed you." Clinton knew exactly what she was talking about, but he shook his head. "I don't want to lose you," he confessed. "If you became pregnant again, you could die." "The doctor does not think I will be able to get pregnant again." "There has been too much damage done from all the pregnancies I've had." She repeated what she knew he had heard from the doctor. She watched Clinton hesitate, and then he blew out the lantern and reached for her. Lydia sighed with relief and surrendered gladly to his arms. It had been a week since they had received the last letter. Lydia's newly formed family was standing on the train platform in the town of Shady Creek, a few hours away from Maple Grove. Lydia stood and watched as Mr. and Mrs. Carver ushered a group of children off the train and encouraged them to stand together. She tried to figure out which child would be Lizzie as the young girls, around 3 years of age, stood before them. She knew the boys were watching the proceedings as well, and suddenly she saw Joseph dart away from them and run to pick up and hug a little curly-haired blonde girl. James followed his brother, but he hung back a bit as he watched his brother and sister together. "That must be Lizzie," Clinton said, his eyes twinkling as he watched the scene. Lydia tried to keep the tears from her eyes, but she couldn't as she watched the small family reunion. Clinton walked up to talk to Mr. Carver. "I don't know if you remember me, but I am Mr. Clinton Byron." He held out his hand to shake and greet the other man. "Sure, I remember you," Mr. Carver boomed. "Let's get these children to the hotel, and then we can take care of the paperwork." "It is a mighty kind thing you and your missus are doing, taking all 3 children. This is not how it usually ends. We usually have to split up sibling groups." "They should be together," Lydia tried to explain. "Joseph and James have added a lot to our family. They want to be with their sister, and we want her too." Mr. Carver looked approvingly. "Go ahead and take her with you, but why don't you meet us at the hotel in, say, 30 minutes? Lydia and Clinton agreed. They walked over to the boys and their sister and moved the 3 children away from the others. Lizzie remembered her brothers. She hung onto Joseph's hand and would not let go. It didn't look like she understood what was going on. Both boys were talking to her at the same time. Joseph was telling Lizzie that she had new parents now, while James told her about their home in the barn with the horses and puppies. Lydia bent to Lizzie's level. "Hello, Lizzie," she said to the child. Lizzie hid her face against Joseph's arm and would not look at her. Lydia wanted to brush the curly hair away from Lizzie's eyes. She wanted to hold the child, but she could tell she needed to go slowly and allow Lizzie to become comfortable with being with her brothers and her new family. "Let's take them to the hotel to wait for Mr. Carver," Clinton finally suggested, and he herded the children toward the large building down the street from the train station. The small family was soon in the cool hotel lobby, and they settled on a couch. Lydia noticed that Lizzie would not let go of Joseph's hand. It was as if she thought her brother would disappear if she let go, so Lydia resigned herself to the fact that Lizzie would need time to get used to her. She sat back on the sofa and allowed herself to enjoy the conversation between the three siblings. She felt so grateful they were able to reunite them and that she was their mother. Soon Mr. Carver arrived with the necessary paperwork, and in short order, all the papers were signed. Lizzie was now theirs. Mr. Carver then turned and with a smile prepared to leave. He was in a hurry, which Lydia understood, as there were still more children waiting for homes. And so, they sent him on his way with grateful hearts. "Why don't we eat at the hotel's restaurant before we take the train back to Maple Grove?" Clinton suggested. Joseph and James thought that was a splendid idea and cheered their agreement, their laughter ringing through the air. Lydia couldn't help but laugh with them, her heart light. The boys walked proudly toward the hotel's restaurant with their sister between them, each gripping one of her hands as though they would never let go. Clinton reached for Lydia's hand and gave it a tender squeeze. When she lifted her gaze, the warmth in his eyes left her breathless. She had long prayed for this moment, for family, for love, for belonging. Now, sitting in the very heart of it, she felt an overwhelming peace. She had a family, a promised family. And as Clinton's thumb brushed gently over her hand, Lydia knew her heart had finally found its home.